My name is Jalapeno. Today in the kitchen we're going to be talking about bone broth. Bone broth is one of the simplest things to make in the kitchen. There's so many beneficial health things that go along with it. But before we really talk about how to make it, and it's very simple, let's talk about two other things. What is it, and why is it important to make it? So the what is, basically you're taking bones from an animal and you're simmering them in a liquid, usually it's water, for at least 24 hours. Then the nutrients get leached into the liquid, and then we consume those nutrients. That's essentially what a bone broth is. And the why you would want to make bone broth is a very complicated, comprehensive list of information that I'm not going to go through today because it's too much, but I'll just give you a few highlights about it. And one is that all of the nutrients, all of the minerals, the calcium, the proteins, magnesium, the phosphorus, the collagen, the gelatin, all of that is in the water, very, very digestible. So that when we consume it, our bodies can use it right away, even more so than those same nutrients in other forms of nature that we might find. So it's, you've heard the old adage when people say that when you're sick, you should have chicken soup. Well, that wasn't just a comfort food that was being recommended. That was historically understood that a bone broth is extremely nourishing and helps revive the body and fight off sickness and disease. There's a saying in South America that a good broth will resurrect the dead. Every culture throughout history all over the world at some point has had bones as a part of their diet because they understood the benefits of getting those nutrients in an easily absorbable form through the bones. And so we have largely fallen away from that here in America, but there's no reason you can't do it yourself in the kitchen. I'm going to show you how easy it is to do today. One other thing that I want to add about bones is that you can make this broth from any animal bones. So today we're going to be focusing on chicken because that's one of the most common bones that people have in their household. But you can do this with beef, you can do it with pork, lamb, venison, fish, turkey, duck. Virtually any animal that you would consume that has a carcass or bones left over, you can make a broth out of. We're going to focus on a very basic broth today, which is essentially just taking raw chicken and cooking it in water. We should talk about the quality of the bones a little bit before we get going. If you do any research online, you'll find that people who recommend bone broth talk about having pastured and organic animal bones. And the reason for this is because animals that are out on pasture and eating the things that they're supposed to eat and fresh grass and getting their nutrients the way they're designed to or created to, those nutrients go into those bones of that animal, into the body of that animal. So when we make a broth from that, we're getting a lot of good nutrients that are easily digested by us and absorbed. Whereas conventional animals, it's not that you can't make broth and it's not nutritious, but they have much lower because they're generally in a confined operation and they're getting the same type of food each day. So that's why people recommend, if you see this, why they'll recommend pastured or organic is the nutrient levels are just so much higher and therefore better for us in that sense. Since I can't cover all of the benefits of bone broth and all of the things that it does for you, I'm going to point you to two resources. One is you can look up online Weston Price and pair that search with bone broth, and it'll give you a list of articles detailing all the benefits of bone broth and how it can help you. And then if you're interested in a cookbook that details exactly how to make bone broth along with other nourishing recipes and scientifically why it's good for you, the cookbook is called Nourishing Traditions. We use that one in our house and it's a great, great resource. So for more information, check out those two resources. Just quickly off the top of my head though, I know that drinking bone broth every day benefits your health of your skin. It corrects digestive disorders and helps you assimilate nutrients better, as we've talked about. Boost your immunity as well. We talked about having chicken soup when you're sick. There's so many vitamins and minerals that come through in a bone broth. It really does help people get better quicker, and there's tons and tons of other health problems that can be remedied by bone broth. So I'm going to trust that you can do your research on that. So when it comes to bone broth, there's a couple ways that you can approach this. And we're going to focus on the simple way today, which is basically we're going to be using this small chicken carcass that we have here. And I'll take it out of the bag and show you. So this was just a chicken that we had butchered this past fall, and it didn't really have much meat on it, but it's perfect for making a bone broth with. And I just leave everything intact, as you see here. The wings are on, legs are on, and I even had the feet, but I forgot to bring them with me. We throw the feet in there. If you have the heads left over from butchering, you can absolutely put those in. And all we do is we'll take out, if it's a carcass like this that there really isn't much meat on it, we'll just throw it right in our slow cooker like that and fill it with water. And for this size of a slow cooker, you want to add about 1/4 cup of vinegar. We use apple cider vinegar, and I don't really even measure it. I just kind of glug it in there like that. The reason that you use vinegar is because it helps extract the calcium from the bone, which is what we need. We need calcium as a vital part of our growth. So that's it. Put the lid on and turn it to low. Now, you don't. One of the things that you want to do is keep it the heat as close to a simmer as possible. It's what helps extract the nutrients the best is that low heat. So we put it on low. There is a high setting there, but we generally don't put it on that. There is a warm setting as well, but I don't know if that would be hot enough to do the job. So if you're cooking this on the stove top, you can do the same thing. Just get a pot and cover the chicken carcass with water, add your vinegar, and then just get the water heated up, but then once it starts to bubble or boil, then reduce it till it's just a little simmer. So for a chicken, to extract the maximum number of nutrients is you want to simmer it for at least 24 hours. You can do up to 48. But bigger animals such as beef, pork, lamb, venison, those bones, you actually need to cook them for a minimum of 48 hours. So we will many times, when we have a whole chicken, say for example, we bring it home and we'll roast it and we'll eat the meat off. We just save the carcass, and after dinner we just throw it right in the slow cooker, and it's going already, and by the next evening it'll be done. You can do that for, if you have a beef roast that has a bone in, or a ham that has a bone in, same thing. You can serve it for the meal and then keep it and throw it in the slow cooker afterwards. So once this has cooked for 24 hours, this is the finished product, what you see here. This is just from raw chicken that we simmered in our slow cooker for at least 24 hours. It was probably more like a day and a half. Sometimes we forget about it, and you can see that nice light golden color there. This is a very basic tasting broth as well. It's not that it's not bad, but we didn't add any salt to it. We didn't add any spices, any vegetables, anything like that. So that brings me to my second point as to how you can change your broth. This is a very basic one that you can use in a lot of different recipes. But if you want a richer, fuller, darker tasting broth, then what you can do is take the raw chicken, and instead of putting it right in the slow cooker, you can actually brown the bones on a stovetop, or throw all the bones and the carcass in the oven and just roast them until they caramelize a little bit, and then put them in here. That'll give you a little deeper color and flavor. Another thing that you can do is take vegetables. There's a classic French term called mirepoix that stands for carrots, onions, and celery in equal parts. So if I were to add that, that would give me more minerals and also more flavor to my broth, and you would put in maybe a cup or two of each one. That really brings out a richer flavor. And you can add herbs. If you're going to add herbs to your broth, then do it about 10 minutes before the broth is finished cooking. So you'd let the bones cook for a day or two or whatever you're doing, and then before you turn it off, add the herbs. And the reason for that is that if you put the herbs in right away, the flavors that you're going to be getting from it are going to be just cooked off. So adding it at the end there keeps that flavor in. As you're cooking, we've noticed that the better quality bones that you have, there's less skimming to do. But if you have poor quality bones, a lot of times you get like this gray sort of a foam or a, I guess you just call it some kind of like, it looks like impurities that rise to the surface, just skim those off, because that's what they are, is impurities. But you want to skim those off with a spoon and get rid of them as it's cooking. What else do I need to talk about here? Yes, I'd be happy to take some questions. You there in the back.
Yeah, do you find that describing the process of carcass makes it more appetizing for people, or maybe a little less?
No, I think I understand what you're getting at, and the term carcass probably isn't the best term to use. I would just say throw the dead animal in there, really, is what I would say.
Okay, so
would that be better, or?
Fresh roadkill, I mean, what's the time?
Yeah. You could throw the bones in the slow cooker. That might be a better term. Yeah, that's a really good point. A couple other things I need to mention here is, one is that some of the bones that you'll be using when your stock is done, after it's cooled, there will be a layer of fat on the top. And I would suggest to keep that layer of fat. You can scoop it off and put it in a jar and keep it in your refrigerator. And you can use that to saute vegetables or cook whatever you want to. So don't throw the fat away. I also wanted to talk about a second stewing. So once you've done your first stewing of the bones, it is the most nutrient dense, but you can actually stew them again. So sometimes what we'll do is we'll make our first batch of broth, we'll drain it off, and we strain it. We basically just pour it through like a sieve, and that's a good enough straining for us. We don't need to get out every fine particle. But then we'll put the bones, not the carcass, the bones, back in there, and we'll make a second brewing of broth. That one's not as nutrient dense, but it's still healthy for you. And I've heard, although I can't say whether this is true or not, but I've heard that some people just keep doing that until the whole bones of the animal are actually all dissolved away and you can consume the whole thing. We've never tried that, but I've heard that you can do it. So once you've made your broth and you've strained the broth, you can keep it in your refrigerator for up to about 5 days, but if you don't use it within 5 days, then what you want to do is put it in the freezer and then you can use it whenever you want. What do you do with broth? So simply what I like to do many days is I just take a glass of broth like this and I add a little bit of garlic powder and salt to my liking and I just drink it. And it tastes just like this chicken broth tastes just like chicken soup to me, and I really like the flavor. You can add herbs to it, whatever you like, but also it's great, makes a great base for any type of soup that you want, as well as for gravies. You can cook vegetables in it. It's a really nutrient-packed powerhouse, so we try and incorporate it into our cooking any way we can. That's probably a subject for another whole video, as well as what to use with your broth once it's done. So, any other questions?
Yeah, I got it right here. Did you find growing up, you made your broth, now lie in it?
The broth, now lie in it. Did my mom ever say that to me? No, I don't think she did. She probably said, you've made your bed, now lie in it, but not my broth, because I don't know if I want to lie in broth, although maybe that's good for you, I don't know. I've never tried lying in broth. Although, I would think it'd be great if you could make a bathtub full of broth and just lie in it and see what happens. Maybe your skin would absorb all those nutrients. So maybe somebody out there can try that and let me know how that goes. I will say, though, that brings me to another good point, though, is, yeah, I could just keep talking about this and probably do a really bad job, but another thing that we do is we used to have a Nesco roaster, one of those big ones, I don't know what size they come in, but it was rather large. And so for beef bones, which many times we would get back, they were so big, rather than cutting them down, we would actually throw it in the Nesco roaster. Or we'd take 2 chickens and put those in the Nesco, and then you can make much bigger batches of broth quicker. So that's another option too. It's very hands-off as well. So when you're making broth on a stove, like I mentioned earlier on in this video, you do have to kind of keep an eye on it as much. So that's kind of why we like the slow cooker, so we don't have to think about it. As far as spices go, which ones you can add and which ones you can't, we haven't really found any that we don't like. It all just kind of depends on your preference. So garlic almost always finds its way into our broth. Onions. We basically just make just this basic broth that we talked about with just water, and then we season it to what we're going to make. So if we're going to make a a chili, maybe we'll add something spicy to it. But if we have this basic broth, then we can take it any direction we want. As far as just drinking it straight goes, which I really enjoy doing, I pretty much always do garlic and herbs. I just really like that.
So another question, how long is this going to keep in the refrigerator and in the freezer?
This broth, once made and it's cooled, you can put it in your refrigerator for up to 5 days. And if you are going to not use it within 5 days and freeze it, it'll last indefinitely. We've had broth in our freezer for months, maybe probably years even, that we'll forget about it and we'll find it on the bottom of our freezer. And yeah, I don't think there's a limit to how long that would take, I would say. Oh, how do you freeze it? Yes, yeah, good question. How do you freeze it? So that's kind of an interesting question. How do you freeze broth? To be honest, we put it in old yogurt containers. We wait till it's cooled a bit, pour it in yogurt containers, label it, stick it in the freezer. And the reason we do that is because it expands in the freezer, and we put it in glass jars, but number one, sometimes the glass jars break because it expands, and number two is it's a little bit harder to get it out of the glass jars if you're in a hurry. A yogurt container, we can actually just run hot water on it, flip it over, and pop it out in one big ice block, whereas in a glass jar, you can't really do that. So that's how we do it, but I'm sure you could put it in any container you want to and freeze it. I know people that actually put it in ice cube trays, and they'll freeze it, and then they pop out the ice cubes and put them in a bag and keep them in the freezer. That way you can just take out as many as you need for a meal or whatever you're making instead of bringing out a whole jar of broth. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
You have any more questions? I am going to run for president.